Well, good evening and welcome to this evening's event, our panel discussion. We're happy you're here. The City of Southlake is broadcasting this for us this evening on the city's television channel and also videotaping it, so we will have copies that will go into the Southlake Library as well. We're very happy to have tonight a very distinguished panel to discuss the importance of the Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport to Southlake, as well as the residents and the businesses over the years. I would like to introduce the panel. You should have a program that has a write-up of each of our panelists, so I won't go through that, but I would like to introduce them, and beginning with Southlake Mayor Laura Hill, and Commissioner Gary Fickus is joining us. Lou Hillman, who's been a longtime resident and realtor in the Southlake Grapevine area. John Terrell, former mayor and currently with the Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport with commercial development. And Greg Last, who was the former economic development director here in Southlake. And Frank Bliss, who's still here in Southlake with Cooper and Stebbins. So I will go ahead and turn it over to former Mayor Terrell so that we can begin the evening. Thanks again for coming tonight.
Connie, I want to just thank you and the Southlake Historical Society for putting this together, not just tonight's panel, but everything that you've done in terms of the history of aviation, how it's impacted this region and especially Southlake. I don't know, do we already have the program put in to play the video? If we can go ahead, what I'd like to do is we're going to make this a really casual kind of fireside chat. I figured looking at the panel that we have, I probably only need to ask one question and we'll use up the next hour and a half in terms of stories from Commissioner Fickus. I think he was here in the early 1900s and, you know, all the way up through Laura, who is our current mayor and can talk about today's impacts and what the future brings. One of the things that I thought was really interesting and very coincidental was the fact that at the same time that this panel and all the displays and so forth were being thought about and put together, the airport just coincidentally happened to be putting together some history of DFW Airport. And in that history, I ran across a video that was 36 minutes long. We promise we are not playing the entire 36 minutes. But we edited that clip just to give you a quick glimpse back into 1970 as to what came out in terms of a video production on what was going to be the DFW International Airport. So if we could go ahead and play that real quick, and then we'll talk to the panelists.
Information desk.
Many of us, too many perhaps, can sympathize with Mr. Average Traveler. As more and more people depend on air travel, more and more barriers seem to appear. But here, midway between Dallas and Fort Worth, we're taking positive action to remove those barriers. I'm standing in the middle of the world's largest air center. From here, you can only see the shape. You cannot begin to absorb the immensity or the significance of what will become one of the most immense, one of the most significant works of man in the entire world. As you can see, we're well along with the construction of the Dallas-Fort Worth Airport. And by now you can begin to appreciate the vast scale of this project. It covers an area of more than 17,000 acres. That's larger than all of Manhattan Island. Our airport is located in the center of the mushrooming Dallas-Fort Worth area. That's Dallas off to the east, about 17 miles from where I'm standing. And over there, about the same distance, is Fort Worth, where the west begins. Getting a feeling of magnitude now? You're looking at a 2,500 square mile chunk of growth potential, and our Dallas-Fort Worth Airport sits square in the middle of it. You'd expect any air transportation center to be located in the center of things, but we'll have to look into the future to understand the difference between just any center and what we're building here, our threshold for tomorrow. Not every geographical area has all it takes to build a new gateway, a threshold for air transportation. The very first thing you've got to have is a need, a growth potential. It's our place on the map which makes air transportation so important for us in the first place. Nationwide, only 14% of all businesses can ship their goods by air. Here, the figure is closer to 40%. The same with people. We're 7th in the nation today in personal air travel, with the highest percentage of passengers per capita of any city. But with our present facilities for air travel and air cargo, that rate of growth would slow down and stop sometime in 1973. That's when we would reach the saturation point of about 8 million passengers a year. That would mean frozen progress. Frozen progress means a frozen economy. It's estimated that without the new airport, we would lose as much as $2 million a year in direct airline revenue. Indirectly, by 1975, without the new airport, we would be losing at least 15,000 jobs and over $200 million in purchases tied to air travel. And there's no way to estimate the loss in time and sheer frustration when people have to put up with super-saturated facilities. On opening day of the new airport, our facilities will comfortably handle passengers at the rate of 20 million a year. By the end of the decade, that figure will expand to 35 million. 3,800 people every hour. And predictions are that by 1985, that figure will more than double. We'll handle a new passenger with a new destination every second of every day. Beyond that, well, we're planning for every possibility of growth. We'll be ready for those increasing passenger loads right in the middle of a growth area. Our airport is located where the need is, and where we have plenty of clear land and wide open airspaces. That means a healthy, unstifled economy with room to grow, with more jobs for more people, and with more money to invest in still more growth. By 1975 alone, we'll be pumping over $600 million into the economy of this area through direct and indirect purchases of goods and services. During that same year, some 25,000 people will be employed on the airport site, with another 25,000 working near the airport in support occupations. And that's just the beginning of our growth potential. It's an ideal location, economically and geographically, and it's happening now. A project of this size, affecting many cities and towns, must have total community support. The citizens of Dallas and Fort Worth showed their support by providing funds augmented by federal grants to buy the vast acreage required. And that's all these people will ever spend. All construction and operating costs will be financed by direct airline fees and airport revenues.
The new Dallas-Fort Worth Airport will be one of the world's finest aviation facilities.
The aircraft system of roads, the runways and taxiways is a major design factor here. We're truly building for the future at the Dallas-Fort Worth Airport. Concrete to carry people, and concrete to carry aircraft and cars. The first link between people and aircraft is a system of roadways. How would you like to join me on a trip into the future? It won't be a long trip, but like all time travel, it will involve some fantastic sights. Ready? The Texas Highway Department has planned a super network of freeways to link the new airport to the many cities and communities it will serve. Existing roadways are being upgraded and expanded to meet the traffic demands by opening day, with more expressways and superhighways planned to meet the future traffic needs of the ever-growing area. These roads will allow air travelers from Dallas and Fort Worth to drive right up to their aircraft gates at the new airport in an average of 20 to 30 minutes, which is less than the average time it takes most people to drive and walk to their boarding gates at Dallas Love Field. For mobile access to the airport, the transit companies of Dallas and Fort Worth have formed a surface transportation system known as SURTRAN. SURTRAN will provide first-class bus, limousine, and taxicab service throughout the greater metropolitan area. So whether you ride SURTRAN or drive your own car to and from the airport, the trip will be shorter and much more convenient than the traffic-packed ordeal of getting to and through most other existing airports. We're planning and building a part of our future that few areas can ever hope to know. In 1973, we'll have something here to offer the world like nothing it has ever seen. And that will be just the beginning.
Everyone was impressed by the technology. That really does put into perspective what this region and area was like before the airport was built. Today, you saw some of the numbers that they put in there, but by 2020, this airport's going to be, it will have 70 million passengers. That is a huge number. 60,000 employees actually work on the airport, with another 300,000 that it directly impacts. And there's an economic impact, not of $600 million that was shown in the video, but $37 billion in economic impact that the airport generates every year. We've got some folks, I think, on this panel who have an amazing history with this city, with the airport, before the airport was there. And we'll take a little bit of time this evening just to reflect on how the airport impacted the city of Southlake and some of the experiences. I'm looking forward to hearing some of the stories that I don't think I've heard before from this great group. And Lou, you know, you've been here a long time. Can you talk a little bit about what you saw before the airport opened and how it has impacted housing and just our way of life?
Okay. When I came here, and I need to say this, I talked about it at the when we had the 50th history of Southlake. I came as the CEO of the Chamber of Commerce for Grapevine, but I have to say this right now, the majority of the people on the board of directors at that time were Southlake. So I've always quoted since then it actually was a Grapevine Southlake Chamber of Commerce, because people, Bob Rockenball, Gail Perry had the plant over here, Don Gershik is where Coles was. I could go down the list, and the majority of the people were from the Southlake area. The reason it was like that is most of the business people in Grapevine lived in Southlake, and then the businesses were primarily in Grapevine at that time, because Grapevine was 2,800 and Southlake was in the neighborhood of about 500 people. And 114 was 2 lanes in each direction. So it's kind of befitting, because really the video there does kind of put it in perspective, because we were all like that back then. But the primary emphasis out here was on getting industry, and I have to kind of put in perspective 2 or 3 things. One of them is that that they wanted industry so bad that I have to tell this story, and this was more a little bit later on, but industry was needed so much out here at that time, or at least they thought, that when I was in my real estate career, I remember standing across the street about where the Gateway Church is with Mike Manis, who was the engineer for Boeing. And Mike was, he had already selected this area. And I was had my real estate firm by that time. And but the only thing, they were going to put the plant, the Boeing plant, here in Southlake, and Southlake wanted it at that time. But the situation was that Southlake did not have sewer at that time, and of course, and that's another thing that was an impact, had an impact on the area at that time, was that they had to build a plant to handle the effluent. It had to go into that creek that you see crossing Kimball Road right north of 114, and it didn't pass the test, so that went to that plant went to Corinth, and as you know, that closed down. It was just basic industry because that's what people wanted at that time. But once you had the division, let me back up to the very beginning. You had that division between Dallas and Fort Worth. You had Southwest Airport, which was to the south, and then you had Love Field, which was the primary airport. One of the interesting things is Southwest Airport was so limited that American Airlines had a close affinity to Amon Carter, who was Fort Worth. He was probably one of the kingpins in Fort Worth. That being said, several of the flights from Los Angeles would fly to Great Southwest nonstop, would land, they would open the door. To me, it reminded me, the few of you that remember bus travel, when the bus driver would open the door and no one would get on or off, and that's effectively what happened. They would shut the door on the plane, and they would just go treetop level and land at Love Field. And that's how divisive it was. But the CAB decided they needed to have something, and so they selected, in this Grapevine, the area that it's in right now, was really kind of the dark horse. And so, but the thing in hindsight, I look back, is if you've ever looked at an aerial of where the airport is, it's all that black soil, that cotton land, which is flat. You know, you don't have as many creeks going through there, and you could see it. It's just one of those things that kind of visualized and came out. But the airport was divided. It had to be here by, the direction of the CAB. And so they had 3 people from Fort Worth and from Dallas. They had J. Lee Johnson, who was, by the way, Amon Carter's son-in-law, and then you had Frank Hoke. Now, you had the mayors of both cities were in, but actually Frank Hoke and J. Lee Johnson were the 2 that really kind of got together and started mending the fence for, building the airport here. It's the amount of speculation at that time, land speculation, was phenomenal. This was the headquarters of where land was being bought. And if people think flipping real estate is new, no, it was, the headquarters was right here. In fact, I remember John Stevenson, who was, I think, the second mayor of Southlake, had a place on Southlake Boulevard, and that sold for, and by the Roddy report, it sold for, I think, $1 million one day, and the Roddy report showed it selling for $2 million the next day, and that was a lot of money back then. It just shows you the degree of speculation. But with the airport, it got built. The design was as a result of, you had Sullivan he was head of the New York Port Authority, and he was the one that came to actually lead the airport at the very beginning. But then Ernie Dean was an engineer with Tippett, Abbott, McCarthy, and Stratton, and Ernie was the one that came up with the design. And I think some of you mentioned that was back then you didn't have the hub situation. You just went straight to the terminal. In fact, I was related. We had a death notice, and I lived at that time on Azalea and Grapevine. We had to fly to Lubbock, and it was 20 minutes from the time the phone call came until we were at the gate at the airport, because all you did was you drove out there, you parked in that semicircle, you walked into a gate and got your ticket and walked right on the plane. So that was the design. That was the design at that time. And so you had the speculation at the very beginning. One last thing, and then I don't want to dominate the business, was one of the things no one has mentioned, and I think Ernie Dean headed this, as I said, Sullivan, I think, was still in charge. Maybe Ernie had taken over at that time. But one day he said, what's going to happen? These people are going to get off of the plane. They've had a hard flight. They want to get a drink, and Grapevine's dry. That was one of the best maybe the best oiled wet-dry election ever. I think and I was reared Baptist, and I think the head of the First Baptist Church was behind it, because that was one of the critical things that needed to be done for a successful airport. So probably some other people may want to go ahead and add some of the things to this.
Well, thank you. I mean, that's incredible, that history, and we all kind of know some of the things you mentioned, Amon Carter, and the fact that, you know, the relationship between Dallas and Fort Worth at the time, and I believe it was Amon Carter who wouldn't eat lunch. He would only take a sack lunch with him over to Dallas, and you know, those relationships.
That's still that way, John.
No, the airport considers itself Switzerland. And so everybody now has come together to support the airport, and it's a great partnership for the region.
Yeah,
well, Commissioner Fickus, you know, I know you've been here, since 79-ish?
Yeah.
I know you've seen a lot of changes, and as a former mayor of Southlake and current county commissioner, I'm sure you've got a lot of stories to tell.
Well, you know, I think when you talk about the development of Southlake, and when I moved here, I guess Southlake probably had 5,000. When I became mayor in '89, we were probably between 6,000 and 6,500. So it was not a large community. It wasn't hard to know everybody, and we didn't have a lot of business, but I remember a major corporation knocked on our door probably in '85, '86, and Greg, you probably remember this, Cardinal Industries. Cardinal Industries was from Ohio or somewhere up north, and they were a manufacturer of manufactured housing. And they built these housing units and shipped them all over the country, and they put them on slabs, put them together, and they built hotels that way, and they wanted to locate right here, right on 114, I believe between Carroll and Kimball.
The same site.
Yeah, Carroll and Kimball.
Yeah, the Fechtel site.
And the Speaker of the Texas House, Gib Lewis, had sent them to us. They had actually come to the state, and Speaker Lewis said, "Well, go see. These guys in Southlake want business." So they came, and the city council and P&Z, I was a member of the P&Z, very wisely turned them down.
Thank you.
Okay? And I look back and think, what would we have become if we had? And that was an industrial, an industrial zoning, and what would we have become if that had happened, or the Boeing deal? You know.
Yeah.
But fortunately, I think Southlake was one of the last cities to get sewer, sanitary sewer. And I think that was the greatest thing that happened to our community, because the land prices got extremely high and the housing prices got high, and it kind of set the tone, especially when Solana came here. And they, I guess, started their program about 1986, buying land, and they weren't even little of it was Southlake, but the biggest part was in Westlake. But they came out here and set the tone, I thought, for what we could be, and I think the town has developed extremely well. Probably one of the finest places in the country, as we all know. So, but I thought that was kind of that we turned down somebody like Cardinal Industries, and a few years later, we get Solana, and I mean, that was spectacular for our area, and then, of course, you guys, Frank. After Walmart, after the Walmart came and went.
So, Gary, that you make a great point, and it's amazing how the future of a city can turn on just a few decisions. And that was certainly a big one. I think there's been a number of decisions just like that along the number of decades that the city has been getting to where it is today. I think that's a big credit to the past elected officials and P&Z members and city staff that really created a vision on how to capitalize on things like the airport, but also to just make sure that it stuck to that vision over the many years. And someone who was integral to that, Greg Last, who was our planning director and then later economic development director, had a great deal of impact on what that vision was, putting things together. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your experience, and when did you start, like 91-ish?
I started on the payroll in 90, and we were the engineering firm that did all the plan review and inspections 5 years prior to that. So really I started Southlake in roughly 85.
So tell us a little bit about what it was at that time.
Well, as Commissioner Fickus mentioned, in that time period there was basically no place to eat other than Dairy Queen, and they had the 2-lane at-grade 114 highway and no sewer anywhere at that point. You know, at that time, Eddie Cheatham was the city engineer for a long time, for 10 or 15 years. And Eddie was the city engineer for Southlake, and we did all the plan review, and Southlake could get a barn, and we were excited because they had a permit they were going to issue in the late 80s. And then in Lou, I remember from the residential side in 90s is when, you know, the things really started to happen. That was, Commissioner, I think you were probably P&Z chair, ZBA chair. You were chair of everything back then, so at some point you were one of those chairs. We started seeing all the residential growth, and a lot of it's driven by the airport. I mean, if you look at the large lots that were, a lot of them were on, well, all of them were on septic at one point. And if you looked at the old subdivisions, they were on the hills where the sandy soil was because they were on septic. Yeah. And so you know, that was the whole city basically, and it was only 5,000 or 6,000 people, and didn't see the sewer until that late 80s, early 90s when they actually contracted with the city of Colleyville to join the line that's in Bear Creek, and they metered it at both ends. But that was the first time, you know, formal sewer came to Southlake, and Southridge Lakes was the first residential development that was less than 1 acre of any size. I recall John Levitt back then was the engineer and did all the projects, and he brought in a plat that you'd get a little kick out of as the planning director that was probably 6 foot wide, 6 or 8 foot tall was the paper, and the reason he did it was because all the lots looked bigger at that scale. And he asked us if there was a maximum size that he could bring in, and he hung that big drawing on the side and said, look how big the lots are, when in fact they were roughly half-acre sized lots. But that's when the development started. We can talk, I don't know, now or later about the impact on the corporate side for the airport.
Sure, I mean, go ahead. You had a lot of experience, and two, you know, you might want to mention, we had a few airfields in the city as well.
Yeah, I saw the sign out front that said there was 12 of them. I remember probably 3 of them. Good Airport out there where Southlake Woods is, kind of towards the Albertson Center, towards Davis. I mean, they were flying on that and had planes, you know, and shed or all that kind of stuff. And then right next to, if anybody remembers, Cap Parade kept flying over Town Square after Phase 1 was built. Cap and Zena Rucker, who was a pilot also, would fly. And, you know, that was after your first phase was built. And to see those planes just barely clear the Phase 1 at Town Square was, you know, a little spooky.
Especially
at the time.
on those windy days.
Yeah. But, you know, so that was a big deal related to the airport development. At some point in time, we can talk about Saber's World Headquarters coming to Southlake. I think, Commish, you were probably mayor at that point. But
I wasn't there. No, I was gone by then.
Yeah.
you might. That's right. Maybe Andy.
Stacy, maybe.
Maybe Rick.
I think Rick was there.
But Saber's headquarters, Saber was the online reservation thing that did American Airlines. They were a child out of American Airlines who was housed at 183 and 360 roughly. And so they were related. I mean, they were driven by the airline industry and would not have been here without the airport. And they actually bought, I think it's close to 500 acres out on Kirkwood on the north side of 114. And they built 500,000 square feet, and they have over 3,000 employees right now. And that would not have happened without the proximity of the airport.
You know, what's interesting, too, is that Sabre facility that they moved out of at 183 and 360 was imploded
really?
just a few months ago, and that's where American is going to build their new worldwide headquarters.
Oh, wow.
So, you know how things, that was actually their
Circle of
first
life.
location for their headquarters was at that Trinity Boulevard site. And then when they spun off, they built the new facilities just barely to the east, a few blocks, and Sabre then occupied that facility and then left back in 2009.
Yeah, that was the big deal. And then the other one that really was kind of an international complex was the Verizon Wireless facility that came in there at Dove and 114 northeast corner. It kind of looks like a kindergarten, but it handles all the wireless communications west of the Mississippi River, one of only 2 facilities in the nation. And I believe that is now the largest taxpayer in the city of Southlake. But largely they were located there because they had, international airport 10 minutes from their front door. It's a big deal.
Well, speaking of locating things here because of the airport, there's nothing bigger in the city than Town Square and the impacts that it has had on this community. And we're very fortunate to have Frank Bliss here. And, kind of start with what you guys did in terms of looking for a location. I've heard this story myself a number of times, but how impactful was it to have not only DFW Airport, but Alliance Airport? And then what have you seen in terms of development from the airport? How has it impacted, this community?
Yeah, no, John, that's a fun story to tell because in 1995, we were a very small real estate company that had done some pretty traditional things. And Peter Cooper, our chairman, challenged us to sort of think outside the box. And instead of doing real estate in a more traditional way, center by center, think about what we could do if we developed something over a generation or more. And you just don't see a lot of great examples around the world of generational type development. But one example we had in Orange County, California, where we were from, was South Coast Plaza, that had begun as a series of lima bean fields on thousands of acres, and a family back in the 40s had a vision that was so strong that it took 20 years to start, and it's still being built to this day. And so we started trying to think that way. So where would we go to find hundreds or thousands of acres and come up with a plan? And it is really hard. But we did research on these types of projects, and every single time we found there was something that was an anchor in that area that was driving it. It might be tourism, it might be a center of government, but the strongest anchors throughout history have been trade routes, highways, rivers, canals, ports. And then there was, in 1995, when we're looking for this site, there were more and more examples popping up where really strong airports, especially international airports, were becoming these regional economic drivers. So Brian Stebbins, my partner at the time, who unfortunately has since passed away, but I'll never forget the day he called me, and he'd been looking at this site, and he said, we've been talking about doing something that's generational, mixed use, open air, sort of lifestyle related. What would you think about building a downtown? And I just started laughing. I nearly fell out of my chair. I'm like, Brian, you don't just build a downtown. He said, I know, but I just think it would work here. And the only 2 days in my entire career with Cooper and Stebbins that I ever was asked to go to a library, which people used to do back then because we had no cell phones, there was no internet. I went to the University of California at Irvine Library, and I spent 2 days doing nothing but researching downtowns. Where did they come from? What makes them thrive? What makes them fail? And what's interesting, if you look at Southlake and you look at this site, if you're going to do something like this, and Brian and I were both 37 when we started this. I turned 59 about a week ago, and it's really becoming generational for me. Adam Cooper, who was a kid, is now part of the business with his dad and with me. If you're going to do something over that period of time, you want to do it with really good neighbors. You want to find people that have those kinds of roots and those sorts of stakes in the ground. And John, to your point, DFW Airport was the best neighbor you could ever ask for. I mean, you find an airport that isn't just a place to move people back and forth. It's an airport that's got a vision. It's got a sense of where it's going. It's got a sense that it is truly the middle of, well, it's the middle of North Texas. It's the middle of North America, if you look at where we sit geographically. And you had it in your video up there that, most places in the country it takes X amount of time to get from here to there. Well, here it's 1/3, 1/4 of X. I mean, you can do things so much quicker, so much more cost effectively from DFW. So here's an airport that's not just an airport, it's an airport that believes in its future, that's investing in its future. And then at the other end of the corridor, you got the Hillwood folks in Alliance, the country's first industrial airport. Ross Perot Jr., again, major deep roots, investing again in an area the size larger than the island of Manhattan. And then you had Salon in the middle. They also at the time had very deep roots. So we felt like we were surrounded by people who were investing and reinvesting and growing and had that vision. So we thought, what better place for us to do this than here? And as far as the future, when we came here, I think DFW Airport was around 50 million passengers, and it peaked and then it dropped when we went through the recession. But of that traffic, I would say most of it, from what we were analyzing, was domestic. And it was coming here not because it was a destination, but it was sort of a connection between point A and point B. But the airport didn't plan on stopping there. The airport believed that it could be a destination, and it had plans to become that destination. The airport saw the importance of becoming a global hub and a global destination. And I don't know how many open skies agreements you guys have opened up since 1995, but I think you've opened up 59 in the last.
Yeah, it's amazing.
I mean,
the growth is phenomenal.
Now we think, oh yeah, we can fly nonstop to Australia, no big deal. We can fly nonstop to Beijing, big deal. We can fly to Qatar. You couldn't have even dreamt that back then. And so for Town Square to come, and just to put it in terms of our gravity when we opened up Town Square was about 5 miles. That's about how far people would come on a regular basis. Mm-hmm. As the airport was getting bigger, as the whole corridor was becoming bigger, as Sabre, Verizon, now you look down the road and you've got GE Transportation, you've got Amazon, you've got Facebook building, you've got all these corporate entities that have come here. Our trade area, because of the gravity, I think, of the overall trade area, has grown from 5 miles to 10 miles. And then in the last, Commissioner, 7 years, $20 billion worth of infrastructure. That map you showed, John, with the airport and all the roads around it, that's shot back in the 70s. Love the graphics. But first thing I thought about was $20 billion, because that $20 billion showed up on that graphic.
Right, $20 billion. And when you really look at it, it all comes to DFW Airport.
It all comes to the airport.
Right.
Yep. And if that didn't happen, then the accessibility to this place would not have allowed facilities like this town hall to be built. It wouldn't have allowed Town Square to continue to
Frank,
expand.
something that jumps out in my mind when you see a video like that, a lot of folks, including myself, just sometimes take for granted that these highways happen in the last 5 years or 10 years. But when you look at how long it takes to plan that kind of infrastructure, this has been decades in the making.
20 to 25 years on a big highway.
And it took, especially with term limits of individuals, the amazing group that is Southlake and this kind of northeast Tarrant County that really came together to make so much of this happen. And it wouldn't have happened had there not been that consistent vision and folks really dedicated to pushing that forward. So how do you see any of the development that is occurring on the airport impacting development here?
If you look at airports around the world, and I'll speak partly to what's there now, but partly what I think may be coming as well. Airports around the world are becoming more than just airports. They're becoming cities, really. They're becoming places where you conduct business. You look at our airport now, you've got 3 hotels. I think it's 3 hotels, if I have the number right. Yeah, and they're great hotels.
Soon to be 4.
Soon to be 4, but not 4 yet. And so you think about what that customer's doing. The customer that's coming to the airport now oftentimes has quite a bit of time. I mean, Lou mentioned, and I kind of remember, I grew up in Davidson, North Carolina. I remember going to Charlotte's airport. And I mean, you just walked right out there and got your ticket and walked onto the plane. It was kind of no big deal. But now people are coming and spending 3, 4, 5 hours at an airport. And one of the things I love about what DFW International is doing is they're looking at the best in class. They don't want to just be measured against their peers here in the United States. They want to be measured against their peers worldwide. And when you do that, when you think that way, and when you then are actually able to transact that, what the airport does on its property now becomes a driver of this whole global engine, which operates like this center of gravity that radiates out around it. And for us, I think there's a point at which the gravity starts to diminish, but if you're within 4 or 5 miles of the airport, if you're Grapevine, if you're Irving, if you're Southlake, if you're Colleyville, you're going to feel it, because those people that are radiating are coming through that airport are going to have time. They've got places they can go. They want to get to the airport certainly before the flight, an hour before the flight, but they may spend other time around the area. The question is, what do they do? And for us here at Town Square, our job is to create a place where people want to spend time. The job of the people that are here at Town Square is when they cross the threshold, if you go into Nothing Bundt Cakes, you want that bundt cake to be really special because it'll draw you back. If you walk into a restaurant, walk into a shop, same thing. Airport's very much like that. When you walk into that airport, you're going to have a choice. You could have flown out of Love Field. You could have maybe flown through Chicago. You could have flown through a different airport. You chose to come here. Why did you choose to come here? Because the airport is doing their job to make that airport your destination of choice. And the more they do that, the stronger I think the entire region gets.
Frank, to your point too, it's interesting, and a number of different surveys have been taken, but it's not just about the passengers who are wanting to go there. It's about international businesses and national corporations that over the past probably 15 or so years have listed as either number 1 or number 2 on their reasons for relocating to this region, DFW Airport. And Toyota wouldn't have moved here, Fluor wouldn't have moved here. A number of these major corporations just wouldn't have moved here had it not been for the ease and access for their businesses, their people, and their products to get around the globe very easily.
And to add to that, Deloitte University, and if any of you ever get a chance to tour Deloitte, please take the opportunity to go see it. But Deloitte worldwide has well over 100,000 employees, and every single employee at Deloitte University, when they start, certainly in this country, is going to go through Deloitte University, and most of their international offices are at some point going to cycle people through Deloitte University. Talk about global attraction, and they would not be here unequivocally without DFW.
Well, Mayor Hill, you happen to be leading this wonderful city now, and by the way, doing an excellent job.
Thanks.
And I think through all of the information, we know you believe in Southlake.
Yes, I do.
What are you seeing in terms of the corporations that are coming in, and how is the airport impacting the economy here at the city?
Sure, thank you. It's interesting as you talk about the airport becoming more international, it's interesting that our community has become more international. We are really benefiting from people that live all over the world, that can live anywhere in the world and have decided to live in Southlake, in large part because they can get where they need to go easily. And so that opens up our community to, and I never thought I'd be sitting on a panel and saying, thank goodness for not having sewer, but thank you for all of those that didn't give us sewer, because now we're poised, and to a point made earlier, as once the sewer went in and the land values came in and Sabre came in and Town Square came in, different types of companies started looking at Southlake, and they started looking at Southlake in large part because of the airport. And so you have companies, yes, Deloitte and Fidelity. You also have a TD Ameritrade that's coming to Southlake, and now Charles Schwab announcing that they're coming, and the incredible millions of dollars that they're putting into Solana, Verizon. None of that would have happened if it wasn't location, location, location. And with all of the road work, we've really benefited from that too, because you can get to the airport quickly from so many places in the Metroplex, but you can also get to Southlake quickly. So if you build your plant or your new corporate headquarters in a Frisco or in a Plano, you as the executive are looking at Southlake to bring your family and to raise your family. And I think our school district has benefited from the influx of international folks, becoming more multicultural, the type of person that can afford to live and build in Southlake, because quite frankly, the land has become very expensive. So you're attracting, you know, the smartest and the brightest and the entrepreneurs. So what came first, the chicken or the egg? Well, you know, when you look at that map of the land and you, in the 70s from the airport looking out towards Southlake and you see nothing, I think that answers the question.
That's a good visual. The you know, Mayor, as you think about and some of your comments about how the city has developed, and certainly the airport was a big kickstart. You know, that it was probably it was the one thing that really generated a bunch of growth. But I think Southlake too has taken that and run with it with a very consistent vision. And I think from earlier elected officials to now, I think it's important that the city of Southlake has always taken the position of, let's not just do the first thing that comes to us, like Commissioner Fickus was talking about. There was a vision about waiting for the right thing. Can you talk to some of the vision and planning that the city's had over a number of years and where the city's going from this point forward?
Sure. Well, you know, I'll tell you, I brag all the time about the 114 corridor. I think other cities, not just in this metropolitan area, but I think cities anywhere in the state that have huge state highways running through the middle of them would love to have a 114 corridor that looks like ours. And, you know, with TD Ameritrade coming, with other financial institutions coming, with Granite becoming a component of Town Square, now we have that office mix. Making the community more, you know, we've talked a lot lately about bringing a trolley system into Southlake, which will be our next step, making it more pedestrian friendly, getting people around a lot easier. I think that the vision that started years ago, it's kind of that if you build it, they will come. It was always an unspoken, no one quite knew what was out there, what the opportunity would be, but there was always this, you know, from city staff all the way up to planning and zoning and council, kind of this sense of it's going to happen and the right thing is going to happen. And Town Square, I'll tell you, Town Square has been just a huge boost to everything that happened in this community because it set a level of quality that attracts quality that is a standard to measure projects by. And I think as we go forward, one of the things that has helped us is this huge sense of community that we have in Southlake. And you can't really put your finger on it. You don't know how it quite happened. But we bring and we attract companies now that want to be part of this community, that want to give back, that want to be you know, eco-friendly, that want to participate in the chamber, that want to give back to all of the charities and the philanthropy in this community. And you just don't find that in a city that's, you know, nearing 30,000 in population. We're not a little teeny city anywhere. So it's been a slow progression. Like I said, I'm so happy to hear that Sewer held us up from making some bad decisions because at different times you look at things differently. And I think for at least the last 15 years that we've been on a path and we know what we want, we know what fits. We look at the beautiful hospitals now coming to this community. I mean, we've become a destination. I mean, you talk about businesses coming here because they can get their employees to and from and do business because of the airport. What about the medical facilities that we have? Whether you have a child that needs state-of-the-art medical care or an elderly parent, you can get your family member to Dallas, get them back home, and get them unprecedented care. And that's bringing all the best hospitals. That's bringing the best doctors. And it just, you know, we've created something now that really is limitless. It really is limitless.
Absolutely. You know, that in real estate, they always talk about location, location, location. So we were absolutely blessed with a fantastic location because of where the airport was developed and because we were so strategically located. You know, the airport actually falls within 4 municipal boundaries, Euless, Grapevine, Irving, and Coppell, with a very, very small piece south of 183 that's actually in the city of Fort Worth. The airport can't operate without having close communications and relationships with those surrounding communities. And Southlake only misses being touching the airport by the width of Highway 26, because right across 26 from Southlake is the edge of the airport property. I know that the airport has done, especially in recent years, but even in the past, has made efforts to reach out to communities to make sure that the planning processes go well. And I'm going to ask you another question, Mayor Hill, about what is the relationship between the city of Southlake and the airport, and what kind of communications are taking place on a regular basis? How is the city being updated of what's happening and giving input to what the city's looking for?
Well, we're very fortunate because I think the airport does business incredibly professionally, and you see that with how they deal with the community. One of the first meetings when I became mayor was a meeting with all of the community directors and the communication directors from the airport. We have a hotline to them whenever we have issues, when we have noise issues. We're notified early when there are repairs being made to different runways so that we can get the word out to our residents. There's a number our residents can call to find out if they have any questions. And as a matter of fact, not even 2.5 months ago, those same folks from the airport came to City Council, and they come a couple of times a year to talk to our residents, to let them know if there are any changes, and really just to keep those lines of communication open. You know, I laugh because the citizens, you know, where can you live and have this quality of life and get in your car and 10 minutes, maybe 10 minutes later, your spouse or Uber is dropping you off at the airport? I mean, honestly, where does that happen? It's impossible for people to fathom that we're that close. I often tell people when they're coming to visit, and I explain, okay, when you land, go out front, my office, you'll be there in 7 minutes. Well, what do you mean 7 minutes? 7 minutes, you'll get off at Southlake Boulevard. What, really? It's just the quality of life that we have. So the relationship with the airport is very important. I feel a very personalized relationship where they pick up the phone for us. They're very close with city staff. There's constant communication. And the more we can communicate and the quicker we can communicate with our citizens, I think it puts it in perspective. When you have to hear a little airline noise because a runway is closed for maintenance, but you're reminded that it's only going to be 24 hours, and then you're back to grabbing that flight, 10 minutes after you leave the house, I think it puts it in perspective.
I think, too, Greg, why don't you talk just for a second about some of, the flight overflights and what the city did to make sure that the planning, working with the airport in putting together our ordinances and various things on how development occurs under that noise area.
Yeah, as a result of the development of the airport and the 4 cities, there actually was some lawsuits back in the day, and through that settlement, City of Southlake agreed to require an aviation easement on all of the plats, the residential plats that are filed in the area at what they call the Northwest Runway, off to the northwest. So if you live in that area or residents live in that area, they may or may not realize it, but on the plat that they purchased their lot on, it would have a navigation easement. In the, I can't remember if it's subdivision or zoning ordinance, there's a airport overlay district that provides for certain regulations related to the development of the airport. So I think Southlake's done a good job of managing the impact of the airport with their proximity. It's amazing that, you still get some folks that move in next to the world's largest international airport and wonder why there's, planes overhead. But
we've gotten a few of those calls before and said, you really need to stop flying over this way.
I'm having a cookout in my backyard this weekend. Can you make sure that I don't see or hear any planes? True story.
Yeah, I think, to what you're talking about, Greg, it's so important to have that open line of communication, but that the city also respond the way the city of Southlake did, which was put things in place so that someone who is buying or building and going to live in the city of Southlake understands way before they make that purchase.
Yeah, and I bet Lou could tell a story or two about, because of your residential realtor background.
Some of the residential impacts.
Well, I think one thing that I've noticed is that people, even with the airport sound, get acclimated to it very rapidly.
Yeah.
I've seen very few people that have ever complained, I wish I had not bought at this location. And it's one where occasionally we do have the situation. I live right there at the edge on Kimball in Kirkwood, and very same situation where sometimes those planes come over, but most of the times you even tune them out, and most of the times you don't even hear them. So I don't really, it's one where that I think that's a very minimal thing as far as the, people making their selection. I think all the other things definitely outweigh it.
This is a good panel to ask a question I've been wanting to ask. Who was it that had the stroke of genius to make sure that 99% of the planes we see are landing when they're quietest and not taking off when they're noisiest?
I think that was
nature with the direction of the wind.
When I moved here and built a house in Southlake in 1982, everybody's heard the story about my realtor said this. Well, my realtor said that the Northwest runway might be built in 20 years. So we start construction on our house, and by the time our house is finished, construction has started with a change order.
Really?
With a change order. A Ernie Dean deal. Yeah. If you knew Ernie Dean, a change order to Zachary. But they started building that runway, and our whole neighborhood, I don't know if you probably weren't around then, but you came later, but our whole neighborhood put up $1,000 a home, and we came to the city, and the city put up money, and we filed a lawsuit. And that's where that settlement that you talked about came from.
Created the landing for the most part, rather than takeoff.
Right.
Yeah, not only was there a navigation easement, but there's what they call LDN noise contours that project from the runway out. And if you know more than I do, correct me, but my understanding is that there are no prohibitions to taking off on that airport, on the Northwest, even though the majority have always landed.
We got our tails kicked, is what happened in our lawsuit.
Well, and there are some restrictions on that, and really most of the traffic is, for landing.
Yeah, it could very well be.
And what was also good was, if you've got a plan in place that folks can make their development, buy their house, and the pattern of the flight, then you can adjust where you're going to live based on that. So a big part of that was putting that.
They've actually got destination markers out by Sabre, basically in that vicinity.
I think it's in Trophy Club. I think
it's out that far where they're supposed to go and take paths. And like the mayor mentioned, they have sound tracking to keep track of if the planes veer off. You can actually monitor that and keep track of where it is.
Wow.
One of the really great things too about what's happened with technology is those MD-80s are some of the noisiest planes, and American
727's louder than that one.
And those are all going out. And Americans getting a new fleet. Those are quieter planes. There's better navigation and instruments for flying, etc. So those things are benefiting this city technology-wise. Two, from a technology standpoint, it was only 15 years ago that the technology didn't exist in an aircraft that you could fly from DFW to Beijing or into Sydney and those locations. So the world has truly gotten smaller as the technology has gotten better, because now those many, nonstop flights that aren't just bringing it into DFW Airport, but bringing those folks into the region, can basically go to almost anywhere on the planet, and which is amazing.
John?
Yeah.
I looked up some numbers before I came here just to see if they were still ringing true. And I think it shows the effect that Southlake, the benefit that Southlake has gotten from the airport. And it's probably the same things happen in Grapevine with all the development they've had around Gaylord, Texas. And Gaylord, Texas is not there because it was a nice place to put it on the lake. It's there because it's next to the airport.
Right.
Okay?
It wouldn't have existed at the
exactly.
airport.
And all that other stuff that's going on out there is the same thing. But back in the late 80s, Southlake's assessed property value, this is adding up everything in town, was $200 or $300 million. By about 1994, it was over $1 billion, and in 96, it was close to $2 billion. You have to, and Southlake at that time had about 17,000 people. You had to, when you start looking at cities that are 15,000, and across the state of Texas, and this would be in the country, and you started looking at their assessed property values for a 15,000 population city, they would be $300 or $400, $500, $600 million. Southlake has always been 5 to 7, 8 times the average. You look today, I'm guessing your assessed value is probably pushing $8 billion.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
No.
Somewhere around $8 billion. You go look at cities that are 250,000, 300,000 in the state of Texas that do not have that assessed value today. So that is what comes from being in the right place, okay, and in the perfect location between 2 major airports and just the effect that they have on the economy. So.
Yeah.
And not having sewer till the 90s.
And not having sewer till 1991 or 1990.
Yeah, we truly have been blessed as a community.
Yeah.
We had a potty flush off in 1990.
Some of those now, we're talking about the first subdivision. The first subdivision in Southlake was Dove Estates. It was, as I recall, John Nyland, who was a cowboy, Dallas cowboy, developed that, and the first lots were 70 by 140. I know we sold some of those first ones, and they were on septic tank. And you know what happened after about 4 or 5 houses? Sure. You know what was running down the bar ditch just because we didn't have curvage.
Well, you had to put 2 lots together to build a house.
They had to replat them into 2, and that still didn't handle it. Yeah. Remember, they had to build the system over on the lake. They had the treatment plant that the city took over and then managed that until I guess it's now tied into the rest of it. But that's again one of those mistakes that we
not in my house.
You probably remember Continental Park Estates, I think, was another one that was pretty small lots, and I don't believe that they had sewer, but they were one of the very first to get retrofitted.
And they had a lot of lakes, and you know where some of the
lakes were a little color problem with the color.
You know, something that the airport has truly impacted was all of the transportation corridors, all the roads and highways, and you can just see from the map, 30 years ago how everything, or 40 years ago, how that was being planned, and it was to kind of surround the airport, but a significant piece of that really had an impact on Southlake. And I know there was a number of folks involved in that. You want to talk to some of the roadway issues?
Yeah, there's some stories to the roadways, I'm sure, but one of the trivia questions is, where is Bluebonnet Avenue? And I don't know, they probably, a couple of them remember, but Bluebonnet is underneath the Lowe's development.
Yeah.
There was a Short Avenue, Short Avenue, actually, Short was the same place.
Yeah.
1709 used to turn there at Kimball and go into 114 rather than going straight where it does now. And I was telling in the hall before we came in that I remember the day after, soon thereafter, when the TechSite opened up, 1709, I lived in Keller at the time. I'm driving back, and I bet there wasn't 15 or 20 cars between here and Keller. And I'm saying, oh, my God, we built too much concrete. There's nobody going to use it. And it wasn't a few days later, and it was, packed.
Yeah. That was 1994 when we cut that ribbon.
And just telling stories, I guess, but when 114 and Commissioner and Metroport worked on that a huge amount, but we had a grand opening ceremony for that and contacted one of the Texas Motor Speedway race cars, and they set up at Whitechapel, and I don't know what they were doing, 140, 150, but it sucked the wind out of everybody standing there when it came through the ribbon.
You know, I remember
Avenue.
before you could ever see it, you could hear
it.
Yeah.
And it was coming. And the other thing I remember was right behind him, Rick Stacy came and did a donut deal in his truck and drove back down the highway.
Yeah, they had the police officer in his motorcycle trying to keep track of how fast he was. But the whole impact of the airport and all the growth changed the highways. And, the traffic counts then got higher, the whole Walmart deal when that happened. And really when Town Square happened is when the counts started getting over that 35,000 cars a day. And I recall when the big deal in Southlake was we want more restaurants. And so that was really...
We have more restaurants now.
Well, I was
Now people complain that we have too many restaurants.
Got a little plug.
You'll see the shopping and dining guide on the back. I recall the first one we did was on the front and back of an 8.5 by 11 piece of bifold. And now there's, 200 or 300 people.
And what's amazing is like 96, 97, I mean, Dairy Queen
got taken out. It was it. That was what you create before you went to the leg.
They did have a great Bellbuster burger. It just
they got
took
taken
5
out
hours to
with the expansion of the highway.
Yeah.
Along with a couple of gas stations.
Because they're approximately where the McDonald's is, just a little
south. They were the
forward
southeast corner of Kimball. Right. I'll tell you another little road story, and Commissioner might remember this, but the city manager at the time where Kimball is actually shifted the right-of-way a little bit towards where the retail center is and where Walmart was so that there wouldn't be enough area to build another sliver of a building between those two. You remember that?
Right.
And so that's how between... I don't remember the name of the center right now, but where Walmart used to be and Kimball right-of-way, there's not enough area. All you see is a few trees in there, but the setbacks prohibit any future development.
Right.
Interesting. Yeah.
Well, we had a lot of offset streets. Carroll was an offset.
Yeah, Carroll.
Big time.
Kimball.
Yeah. Peytonville might have been. There were,
Peytonville was.
Random Mill
was
an offset at 1709. Yeah.
Well, and Commissioner Fix, too, I want to thank you from a city standpoint and the partnership that the county has really had with this city in terms of a number of different roadways throughout the city and even in partnership. I mean, I don't know how many cities in the past have or anywhere around that have partnered with their big retail developer, their downtown developer, the church, the county, and state, and the city all combined to put in a Texas U-turn. That, to my knowledge, I don't know that I've ever heard that happen.
That was one of the fastest TxDOT projects ever.
I love that U-turn. I love that U-turn.
And so do I. I'm Northsider, and after Gateway Church lets out, I can actually still make it across. So, Laura, you have anything else on the kind of the future of, where we're heading with the roadway system and development in the city?
Well, one thing we think is interesting that just came up recently, and we put some money in the budget, and maybe someone here knows the answer to this story because we've heard it told a couple different ways. But when TD Ameritrade announced that they were coming, and they'll be on the north side of 114, just a little to the east of Solana, to the west of Verizon. And no one understands why the access road for 114 ends there. So we've actually put money into the budget now, and we'll be adding in the immediate future that northern access road, not for TD Ameritrade, but to keep another option for people to stay on the access road and really move all the way from Grapevine through Trophy Club. So, Greg? What happened?
I know the reason.
What happened? No one will take credit.
I know the reason it didn't get built, was not built, is because TxDOT Dallas division built the Kirkwood interchange. And it was all paid for by McGuire Thomas partners, IBM.
Right.
And they didn't want to spend the money for the frontage roads because they didn't need them at the time.
Yeah, I actually just happened to talk to Tom Allen yesterday, but Tom was the local partner for McGuire Partners, and they built the entirety of Solana back in the late 80s. And they were a corporate destination. In fact, still are, I think, the largest, correct me if I'm wrong, single managed complex in the DFW area. And their plates, the scale that they do is phenomenal. But at the time, and McGuire Partners, Solana was designed by Ricardo Legarreta, was a really renowned, internationally renowned architect, and that's why you saw the colors. But McGuire did not want frontage roads. In fact, didn't want them built. And they actually constructed that interchange in the late 80s when it was out in the middle of nowhere.
Right.
But that's why there never was. In fact, Tom called me to ask if I knew who to talk to find out if the story he read was true, that there were going to be frontage roads, because he would have swore up and down there'd never be frontage roads there.
Well, there's going to be a frontage road there, so.
Times change.
Only going to the west. The east,
But
we're
it's
going to
not
be talking to our neighbors.
Not cheap.
No.
No,
And
it's not cheap at all.
on who's bigger, I think our friends at Granite, if you haven't been up to Granite Park in North Dallas, go check it out. They're also building a boardwalk with restaurants that's going to just be so cool. But I think they're on pace now to eclipse the 1.8 million square feet. Oh, yeah. Yeah, they are really building up there and building some great stuff.
Yeah, they built some. As a matter of fact, when you first called me and told me about the Granite project, I got in my car and drove up to Legacy on a Sunday. And I remember pulling in front of one of the buildings, which of course was closed, and there was a guard, so I'm walking around looking in the windows. I did have my driver's license out in my hand because I was prepared to get, a phone call and the police show up. But finally the man came and stuck his head out of the door, and he said, "Are you okay?" And I told him I was from Southlake and that they were going to be building a building like that in Southlake. And he said, "Come on in and walk around." So a couple of the other things that are happening that are interesting, we've been talking to Carolyn, of course, definitely one of the largest multi-use projects in the city that everyone realizes has been stalled on the retail end and office end. But we have we're pretty thrilled with what's coming forward with some office and some hotel to get that kick started. And then of course Fidelis picked up a sizable piece of property on the north side to the east of, I guess that's Dove, to the east of Dove, and on the north side of 114. And they're looking at mixed use, mostly office, Fidelis. And really, what we're starting to see now is a move toward hotels. We're getting a lot of hotel projects that are coming forward with a very little, a small retail component, really just what's needed by that hotel and the office building, and then some nice office building that's coming forward.
When you bring up the hotel, a big piece of what all the hotels surrounding the airport look at is the number of passengers flying in.
True.
Because our typical population just wouldn't support all the hotels that are looking in Southlake, but for the number of folks that are flying into the region. So that's just another significant.
And definitely with Weston, I mean, we're hoping that Weston will break ground here in the next year, and that is, I mean, that's Weston's game plan, is the
right.
business traveler. So.
I might just mention on hotels, talk about the history of kind of being choosy about the type of things that come to the city. I had a stack probably 6 inches high of hotels that wanted to be at the city that my immediate response was, you don't have a chance because of the type and quality, and had a highlighter that would just point, see that stack over there, that's the stack of other people who are trying to bring in lower end hotels. But, I think some of those people were testing the waters that then brought in a little higher quality hotel. And the proximity to the airport's driving that. I mean, it's the destination use, but then the town square being right next to the hotels, and the Hilton is phenomenal. The numbers that they do is unbelievable. Yeah. But the hotel industry, I think, is going to be strong due to the airport, town square, and the amenities that the city has.
Yeah, it's already kicking off. I know we've only got about 11 minutes, and I don't want to. These are some great stories, but I also, before we conclude, I want to give anybody in the audience that has any kind of question about what we're talking about, what's going on, impacts with the airport, what's happening with the city of Southlake and how it's been impacted by the airport. I also just want to say, I know Sandy Lancaster is in the back of the room, who's with DFW Airport and is one of the main people that come and communicate with the city of Southlake. So thank you for being here, and thank you for all the communication and efforts that you keep up with this city. Do we have any questions? Anything that we can respond to? If we don't know, we'll make something up. Yes, ma'am. Ed?
I am just wondering about the historical site in Southlake, the city of Southlake. What are we doing to preserve some of our history in this town?
Okay.
And I was excited to hear, what each one of you had to say, past, present, and future. But there's just a certain history to this town. And as much as I want to see growth, I also want to see some of those sites preserved. So I guess I'm asking,
Sure.
as a city, the city that I love, my family, my friends, it's just, I see how we're trying to get to our future, but how do we preserve the past?
Absolutely, and that's a very good question. I'm not sure if we're the better ones or Ms. Cooley might actually be really good to respond to that. And Ms. Cooley, if you wouldn't mind coming up to the microphone, I'll talk to it a little bit. There are definitely some areas that I think our past leadership and the community wanted to make sure we've preserved. I think areas up in Bob Jones Park, the areas by Bicentennial, we've actually purchased more land and developed more land for parks, open space to protect some of those areas than almost any other city around us. But I'm going to let Ms. Cooley just talk to it just a little bit about what's going on.
So thank you for that question. The Historical Society, which I just want to say real quickly, Commissioner Fickus is credited with establishing in 1992. The sense of everyone wanting to preserve Southlake as to what it was when you came here, everyone feels that way. Whether you came in 65, 95, or last year. You have an idea of Southlake in your head, and that's what you would like to see because you're so happy with it. But of course, that doesn't happen. Southlake is a strange town in that it wasn't a town. It was a rural area with horse farms, and everyone went to Grapevine. Grapevine was the town, and Roanoke. So when my theory, the Historical Society, of which we have several members here tonight, our theory is that Southlake was really created because there was a huge rush to annex land. And Colleyville was a town the same year that Southlake was a town. And so it wasn't really, they wanted to be a town, but someone else was going to annex them in, and they knew they didn't want to be Hearst. So in the 50s, all these little towns started, but we didn't have the infrastructure. We were just farmland. Yeah. And as the growth of DFW Airport, and I must say one thing that really we haven't even talked about tonight is the schools. The schools, Carroll Schools, was a draw and continues to be a draw. So you put those together, but you have to have all the infrastructure, and we only have 2 historic buildings in Southlake. The Carroll School, the original Carroll School, is still intact on Carroll Avenue, and the reconstructed log house. So we do have 2 structures, but I think what you're mentioning is so true. The stories are what we have, and these stories tonight, and putting them on record. We have a website. The city of Southlake is very good to help us create and put things on their website. We work in conjunction with the library and other nonprofit groups to try to keep these kinds of things alive. So when we have, and with the city's help, these kinds of discussions and exhibits, that's how we can keep Southlake's history. But we don't have the buildings that Grapevine has.
Good job.
And but we also have a wonderful town square that looks old.
Well, if I could just add something, there's a very conscious effort here in Southlake Town Square to embrace history, but also to embrace our future. And we really do think of ourselves 50 years down the road, 100 years down the road. Buildings like this, buildings like the Trader Joe's that we built. We build a lot of buildings here with the idea that in 100 years they will be historic buildings. And we're putting that level of quality into the structure, the foundation, the concrete, not just all the things that you typically see if you go to a strip center. So from our standpoint anyway, I love the question because you can't create a history that didn't exist 50 years ago, but what you can do is create the history that's going to be there 50 years from now.
In 1990, there were 5 existing log structures in town. I think 3 of the 5 had actually been incorporated into more modern homes. They built and expanded and remodeled, and so they somewhat lose some of their historical significance. But we did take the one down that was across the road, where the Central Market is. There was one on that property, and I think they took that one, combined it with some other logs from other houses, and built the house at Bicentennial Park. But the others, I believe, are gone now. They were either the whole houses were torn down. I know one of them was moved from Southlake to Argyle. Of course, the house in Grapevine on Main Street, the Torian cabin, that came from Southlake. So,
well, that was at Kimball and Dove, just right around the corner from that. It looks like our time is about gone, and I'm probably the oldest one in the room, and I've always been a big believer in history and also looking at the future. And I had a thought the other day about Chicago and St. Louis. You know, both of those are cities that were founded and grew and prospered at one time because of their location in relation to highways and especially trains. And my thought came that I think we're going to replace them in this hemisphere, in that this location and what we've talked about tonight has more, it's probably the best area in the hemisphere to really interact like we're doing with our, you know, now with the air and all the other new things that we have.
Absolutely, and you know, I think not only our location, but as a region, we have such a diverse economy. You look at other major cities that have focus in certain industries, like Houston, who, when something happens and there's a downturn in that particular industry, it impacts those cities huge. Because of the airport and the diversity of this region, we continue to add more and more diversity, which just makes us more stable and helps us weather any kind of downturns in the future. Well, when you have a stable economy, you are able to snowball that because all of the industries and corporate headquarters that are looking for that stability that are in a California or in a Detroit area, they're looking to get to some place that has stability, diversification, and somewhere where they can thrive without a significant risk. That's what the airport has created for this region, is that stability and diversity. So it's been great.
Any other questions? Were there any other comments? Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Please.
It's just amazing.
It's a testament to all of the folks on the panel, because the history of it is probably the most important thing that we've got to know. Because if you don't remember the history of how it started, you don't know where it needs to go. And for all of y'all that have had and are having an impact on how this whole thing unfolds, my hat's off to you. You've done
Thank you for those comments. Are there any other questions anyone might have? Well, I know our time it is exactly 8 o'clock.
Very good.
So I want to thank all the panelists for your insight, your history. I learned actually and heard some stories I hadn't heard before.
Yeah,
So thank you
good.
very much, and please help me thank them. And Connie, would you like to say a few closing remarks?
Thank you all again on behalf of the Historical Society, and we hope that you will be sure the exhibit will go on another week, so you have time if you haven't seen it, and it also is on display in the library when the library is open. So thank you again for coming tonight. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Very nice.
Yeah. You know, where was the last?